Amen. Well, good morning. For the last while, we have been walking through the message of Hebrews. Not just a letter, not just words written down and sent to a group of believers, but a message intended to be delivered to a group of people who were struggling, a group of people who found themselves on the edge of a cliff, a group of people because of their faith, their newfound faith in Jesus Christ, had found themselves being persecuted, had found themselves being pushed aside in the midst of the community in which they lived, some by the business community, some by even friends and relatives. And they found themselves on the edge of this cliff, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to respond, how to be able to pull back away. And in the midst of that, from the heart of a pastor who loved them dearly, we get this message of Hebrews. And that is to whom it was written. And in the midst of that, his intention is to encourage them. His intention is to come alongside of them, put his arm on their shoulder and point them to someone who would bring them back from the edge. And as we have walked through this amazing message, we have been, I think, intentionally brought, a step by step towards the practicality that we have found over not just the last couple of weeks, but what we'll find in the coming few weeks as well. And the pivot point of that really is found in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, where the author tells them, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And he goes on to say in that same passage that without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And over the course of these last weeks, we've discussed a little of the power of faith. If you remember some of chapter 11 and some of what is often referred to as the hall of faith, the hall of fame of faith, then you will remember, those like Noah. It was faith that guided Noah. Faith that guided Noah to build, a boat in the middle of a place that saw no rain. It was faith that took a man named Abraham from all that he knew and a land that he knew, the people that he knew, and took him to a place that he had never been, a place that he had never seen. It was faith that allowed Sarah, his wife, to ultimately to give birth to her son Isaac. It was faith that took Moses from Egypt, from the wilderness, and then from Egypt through the Red Sea, through right up to Mount Sinai, and ultimately right to the very edge of the Promised Land. It was faith that saw the walls of Jericho come crumbling down. It was faith that saw a man named Gideon triumph over extreme odds. It was faith that allowed Samson to overcome. It was faith that guided so many. We could go from cover to cover of our Bibles and we could name them one after the other. Those who were guided, those like Samuel, those like David, and countless others that we could list, those who were guided by their faith. It was faith that allowed believers to stand strong throughout history, some of which the author of Hebrews lists for us in the latter half of chapter 11. It was faith that allowed those from burning stakes to the cruelty of the Colosseum in Rome to survive, to thrive in the midst of it. Not survive even with their lives, but survive with their faith intact, regardless of what they faced. And it was faith that we're reminded of a little of last week, that is taking Tim and Brianna from this place to Mexico. But faith is not just observed. And I hope we understand that. I hope, if we have gained nothing else in the midst of this message of Hebrews, I hope we have gained, the reality that faith is more than just information we put in our heads. It's more than something that is observed. It is something that is lived. It is something that ought to be lived. Yes, it is faith that takes us to places in our lives that perhaps we would not otherwise go. It is faith that allows us to step out in obedience when we don't understand or have all of the details of what's around the corner. It's faith that gives us the strength to go forward when we know that we don't have it in ourselves to do it all on our own. But faith is more than conquering giants. It's more than leaving everything that you know, more than walking out, if you will, into a world where you don't know what the end result is. Faith is lived out. It's lived out in the everyday struggles. It's lived out in the everyday challenges of life. But it's more than that. It's lived out in the everyday, just mundane stuff of life. It's faith that will encourage us, yes, in the darkest of times. It's faith that will motivate us in the most difficult of times. But it's faith that will also keep us moving in just the simplest of times in our lives as well. And we have talked over and over these last months, really going all the way back to the beginning of this year. We've talked about the reality of finding ourselves, as this group of believers did, oftentimes at the edge of a cliff. Sometimes struggling because of who we are. Sometimes struggling because of what we have done. Sometimes struggling just with the stuff that we are in the midst of today. And still at other times struggling with what is yet to come. We've all found ourselves on the edge of a cliff at one time or another. And just, I spoke to maybe a half a dozen of you this morning, more than just, saying hello. And I'll tell you, we are no stranger to this. In our midst this morning, there are many who are right there on the edge of that cliff, wondering what to do next. And there are, I would say, countless others that I have not spoken to this morning. Countless others who are in this room who are standing on the edge of that cliff. It's in those moments where we need encouragement. And if you came here this morning thinking that, all you got to do is show up at church and everything's going to be, peachy keen, you came to the wrong place. Because that's not the reality of it. The reality is our faith is lived out through those circumstances. The reality is that our faith is demonstrated to those around us by how we respond in the midst of those circumstances. And it's in those times when we need to find a way, do we not, to step out from underneath the load that we often carry. It's in those moments when we need to hear a message such as we have been walking through these last weeks and months. It's in those moments I think we just need to pick up our Bibles and read through Hebrews, because that is what we will find. We find a message written to a group of believers who are struggling. A message of encouragement. It is, as I have called and mentioned before, it is the New Testament's answer to encouragement. And we continue that this morning in verse 1 of chapter 12, where he says, therefore. And you've probably heard me say this, you've probably heard other preachers say this, that when you see that word, you need to sit up and pay attention, because you can't just drop into it. You need to understand its context. You need to understand why it's there. You need to understand what has come before. Because essentially what he is saying is, because of everything else. Now certainly, and we'll see this as we walk through these few verses this morning, he's referring to chapter 11. He's referring to that which he had just written down, that which he had talked about, those men and women of faith who had stood as pillars. He was referring to them. But he's also, I believe, referring to the entirety of the message that he has been laying out before them. And so he says, therefore we. And this is another interesting point that he makes here, interesting shift that he makes here, because not only is he saying, because of all of this, he says we need to do something with it. We need to be aware not only of all that he has said, but of what is to come. What are we to do as a result? And you notice he includes himself in there. He's not some guy who's standing on a platform and, who has arrived, who understands everything and who has gone beyond it all. No, he's right there in the midst of life with them. And so he says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. I mean, that's a cool picture, isn't it? I mean, think of what he has just talked about. He's just talked about, people like Noah and people like Moses and Abraham and Gideon and Samson and on and on we could go. And the picture is as though these are all sitting up in this, grandstand of heaven, watching what we are doing. Watching, waiting. And the picture, I think, and the intent that he is getting at is that those who have gone before us stand and watch what we will do next. What we will do with the faith that we have been given. What will we do? How will we respond? And so he goes on and he says, let us lay aside then every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. And he goes on, and we'll catch up on that next week. But if we had time this morning, I would go back to the very beginning of this message, the very beginning of this book, and read it for us. In fact, I wish that we would have had the time to do this every single week, that we would kind of go back to where we were. If you've ever watched a TV series, they always give you kind of a glimpse of where they were to kind of catch you up. I wish we could do that right from the very beginning of the book of Hebrews, that we would be reminded that none of this happens in isolation, that it all happens as he builds from one thing to another, to another, to another. And hear this message in its entirety. I hope and pray that somewhere along the way over these last months, you have taken at least once. I hope you've done it more than that, but at least once, and you have stopped and you have just read through the entire message of Hebrews, because there's nothing quite like it. You see, within the pages of this message, of this letter, I believe is the answer to all of life's struggles. Yes, I said that. All of life's struggles. Everything that we might be burdened down with. Everything that we might feel the weight of life from. I believe the answer to that is found in this message. And his name is Jesus. You see, that's what the author of Hebrews has been pointing them to. That is who the author of Hebrews has been pointing them to over and over and over again. So let me ask the same thing I have asked many times over these last weeks. Have you ever been discouraged? Have you ever, found yourself at a place where you were distraught? Even to the point as these believers were, where they were beginning to question their faith, wondering, is this even worthwhile? The worst of the weight that we sometimes feel, though, sometimes it happens in the places that it shouldn't happen. Is that not true? I would imagine that some of these believers, as they were looking out at the community that they grew up in, that they had done business in, that they had family and friends in, and all of a sudden it's their family and friends and their coworkers, the ones who were actually, who were coming against them, those who were persecuting them. In our day, I couldn't tell you how many people I have visited with over the years that have told me that their greatest hurts have come at the hands of those that they gathered to worship with every single Sunday morning. Well, that's a whole different message, isn't it? But the point is that we all have felt those things. We all have felt what it is like to stand on the edge of a cliff. And the ones to whom the author of Hebrews was writing to, the weight of their lives was so heavy that they were considering tossing in the towel. They were considering just walking away from their faith. Again, I couldn't tell you how many individuals, how many families that I know are not in church because of this very thing. And the answer to that is found in the same place as the author of Hebrews points these believers. You see, in order to encourage them, in order to help them, to inspire them, to stand up and walk by faith, the author of Hebrews writes to them this amazing letter, this amazing message, and reminds them of who Jesus is and what he has done. And like, the Hebrews to which this letter was originally written, each of us, I would say, stands with some weight of life upon us. And far too many of us know, I think, what it is like to walk through life wounded. In fact, God's desire in the midst of it is that we walk by faith and live by faith, not in the absence of those things, but in the midst of those things, in spite of the weight of the world that we feel. Remember some of what the author of Hebrews has said along the way? He has said, do not cast away your confidence. Instead, he says, live by faith. And here's the challenge, though, isn't it? Is that sometimes we're not sure what that looks like. We're not sure, how do we wrap our hands around that? Well, we don't have to go any further than to look at history, right? We've highlighted that. That's why he gives us that list in chapter 11. That's why he goes from one to another, to another, to another. When Noah felt the weight of a community telling him, you are out of your mind. Why are you building a boat? It doesn't rain here. He built the ark anyways. With the weight of family pressures and all the comforts of home, Abraham went where God sent him regardless. I mean, we remember some of the account of Sarah, don't we? Of Abraham's wife, with the weight of wanting a child. And even, you remember, she tried to do things her own way. And yet, in spite of it, God sent her a son. Joseph certainly felt the weight of life, didn't he? I mean, some of us think we're the only ones that know what it's like to be betrayed. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, by his own family, sold into slavery. He was betrayed by, not really an employer, but, the guy who bought him and ended up working for him. He was betrayed by him, by his wife. He was betrayed even after he had gone to jail, betrayed by one in whom he had put his trust, on and on and on. And yet, in spite of it, he walked by faith. Moses felt the weight of an entire nation, the weight of the calling of God to lead an entire nation. And in spite of his own mistakes, and he made some of those, in spite of it, he saw God do amazing things, not only in his life, but all around him. And if that weight isn't enough for you, then the author of Hebrews lists for us others. Others, he said, who were stoned. Others who were sawn in two. Others who were destitute. Others who were tormented. I mean, on and on and on we could go. Why would he list these things? Because he is seeking to help us gain perspective. You see, the climax of this passage, of this entire book, is found not in how others walked by faith in the midst of the weight that they were carrying. It is found in how we walk by faith through our lives, especially in the midst of the weight that each of us carries. Lay aside, he says, every weight. And if we could summarize, really, we could probably go back and summarize the entire book by just saying this, what he says here in chapter 12. Lay aside every weight and fix your eyes on Jesus. I mean, that's in essence what he's saying here. An example that far surpasses all the others. Why is that? Because not only did Jesus die on a cross, but he carried the weight of sin of an entire world upon his shoulders. And as this passage tells us, he did so and considered it all joy. Now that's messed up, isn't it? I mean, to have that kind of weight, to carry that kind of weight, and yet consider it joy. How? Why? Well, it was that joy, he says, that drove him to the cross. It was that joy that kept him on that cross. It was that joy that ultimately that raised him from the dead. You realize that at any moment along the way, any moment in that whole scene that is played out, from the time that he was arrested all the way until he took his last breath on the cross, he could have called a legion of angels and he could have just taken over. At any moment, he could have stepped off of that cross and put an end to his suffering. At any moment, he could have said, these people are not worth it, and just walked away from it all. How could he have done such a thing? Well, because of who Hebrews tells us he is. Remember that? We go all the way back to the beginning, because he's greater than the angels. He's greater than Moses. He's greater than the law. He's greater than any priesthood. Through him, one covenant was rendered obsolete, and a greater covenant was instituted by and through his blood. And if all of that is not enough for us, then in his sacrifice 2,000 years ago on that first Easter, his sacrifice, Hebrews reminds us and tells us, was greater than all other sacrifices. Remember that? Where we dove into a little of how he explains to us that all the rest of those sacrifices were mere copies, a mere reflection of what was yet to come, of what was taking place truly in the throne room in heaven. This is the one who could have walked away. This is the one who could have stepped off of that cross. And this is the one who could have called a legion of angels to stand by his side. But for the joy, he says, that was set before him, he endured the cross. But for the joy that was set before him, he despised the shame. But for the joy that was set before him, he sat down then at the right hand of the throne of God. You see, his desire was so great to see us live in a right relationship with the Father. His desire was so great to spend an eternity with each and every one of us in heaven. And his desire was so great to see us receive forgiveness for our sin. That is what kept him on the cross. That is what set his eyes towards Jerusalem. Do you remember reading that in the Gospels where it says, and Jesus fixed his eyes or set his eyes towards Jerusalem? That's the same idea, the same construction, even if you will, that the author of Hebrews uses here when he says that we ought to do the same thing. Not fix our eyes towards Jerusalem, but set them towards Jesus and Jesus alone. You see, not only is he the answer to the weight that we carry in our lives, not only is he the one who died and rose again on that Easter Sunday morning, but he is the one who can give us strength. He is the one who can bring endurance. He is the one who can ultimately bring hope in the midst of any challenge that we might face today. You see, he is the one who helps us live by faith. And knowing all of this, understanding all of this, the author of Hebrews seeks to help us wrap our heads around it. Seeks to help us, learn to walk in the same manner. And so he outlines these amazing truths leading up to, leading all through this message of Hebrews. This author of this amazing message highlights for us in the midst of this some of the great men and women of faith who lived this exact way. And he says, as we come to our passage today, therefore, because of this, Because this is true, because of those who have gone before us, let us do the same thing. Let us live lives of faith as well. And here's the practical side of this. The simple steps, if you will, that if we would only implement in our lives, we too would be able to live lives of faith. We don't know what is out in front of us. We don't know what challenges are still yet to come. But if we want to live lives that reflect the truths that we have learned, if we want to live lives that reflect, the reality that we believe this one that the author of Hebrews holds up and says is greater than anything, greater than everyone, that holds even the world itself by the power of his word. Well, if we want to learn to walk by faith and learn to walk with encouragement and hope, then we need to listen to what he has to say. Faith is not living through others. Faith is living it out in our everyday lives. And to that, our author says, we should lay aside every weight. Lay aside, he says, the sin that so easily ensnares us. We should run with endurance, and we should fix our eyes on Jesus. You see, it's in these things that will not only will enable us to step away from the edge of that cliff, but it's these things that will allow us to demonstrate to those around us, to our friends, to our neighbors, to our husbands and wives, children, grandchildren, that our faith is real. Nothing, I don't think is more sad than someone who claims to have and live a life of faith, but yet as soon as they face difficulty, crumble. You see, again, we come to a point in this message of Hebrews that we could spend all day just discussing these few things. All day just trying to unpack the implications of what he's saying in just these few verses. Because here's what I want us to hear. I want us to understand and hear that these things that he is setting in front of us, this has the power to transform your life in every way. How is that? Well, first he says, lay aside the weight and the sin that grab a hold of us, that hold us back, the things that keep us from walking by faith. Now he's painting a picture that comes and using language that comes out of the world of athletics. And the picture here is a runner who sheds everything. Runners in that day, I guess in our day as well, wear very little. Like everything goes. Why is that? So that nothing will hinder them as they go. The idea that he is getting at is to push away those things that hold us back. Those things that distract us, that stop us from running the race that is set before us. And so tell me this, what are those things in your life? I mean, they're likely different for all of us. But what are those things in your life that sneak up and grab a hold of you? Those things that slow you down, those things that stop you, those things that distract you from drawing near to God. Those things that stop you from holding fast to what you believe. You see, there's no shortage, I don't think, of these things in our lives, is there? I mean, they can go and range from anything from habits, to pleasures that we enjoy, to the associations that we have with other people, to hobbies that we enjoy, to entertainment. I mean, some of these are good things, right? They're not necessarily bad. But if we are to live lives of faith, according to the author of Hebrews, if we want to live a life of faith, we need to shed everything and anything that would hold us back. Anything that distracts us should be simply tossed aside. I don't know that we can overemphasize this, because in our world there's so many. It's so easy, isn't it, to be distracted? It's so easy to distract ourselves in the midst of life. You see, if we fix our eyes on those things, if we fixate on what is wrong, if we fixate on the things in our lives that are hard, on what is difficult, what is even painful, then soon there's no room for hope. Because encouragement doesn't have room to take root if we are fixated on everything else but. And what does the author of Hebrews tell us? He tells us to fix our eyes on Him. And the more I think about it, the more I have contemplated these last weeks, I believe here is one of, if not the greatest issue that believers today, the greatest reason why we find ourselves so often at the edge of a cliff. Now, I want you to hear me. I know we don't like to hear it. But too often, we spend so much time and energy fixated on what we think is wrong, on the difficulties that we are having, on the challenges as real as they might be, that we don't even attempt to draw near to the one that can bring us. Do you remember what he tells us earlier in this amazing message? That He can bring us rest in the midst of it, in the midst of any and all circumstances. But if we're going to be honest, sometimes it's not really encouragement that we want, is it? It's sympathy. We want somebody to come alongside us and just pat us on the back and say, poor you. Didn't we talk about that little precious thing that we often just pet? If you don't know what that is, you have other problems. You come and see me. But that's why he says we must run with intention. We must run with endurance. We must be intentional. We must run in the midst of our difficulties. Why? How do we do that? Because as our author, our author didn't write it, but one other author that I read, I couldn't even tell you now who it was, he said this: we are driven by our faith and drawn by hope. Isn't that an amazing statement? We are pushed forward by our faith, by the concreteness of the things that God has done, how He has worked in our lives, and we are pulled forward, just as Jesus was pulled towards that cross by the hope that lies out in front of us. You see, and this opens up another whole can of worms, doesn't it? What does Peter say? Peter says that we ought to be always ready to give an answer for what? For the hope that lies within us. Hope in the midst of difficulty. Hope in the midst of trials. And so this phrase, when he says, looking unto Jesus, fixing our eyes on Jesus, it's the idea of being so focused on Him that we have no distraction from it. It would be like, putting blinders on our eyes so that we only focus upon Him. Don't you think it's interesting? And we could mine this quite a bit, I think. But it's interesting to me that as he talks about this whole idea of walking by faith, just as those who have walked by faith before us, it's the idea of distraction. It's the idea of focus. It's the idea of perspective that he brings us back to. I mean, that's why he says, in verse 3, consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. He's giving them perspective. He's pointing us towards perspective. You see, we have highlighted along the way the warning passages in Hebrews, right? You remember me saying something about those? I believe, even though it's not often listed as one, in fact, I don't think it's listed anywhere as one, I believe this is also one of those great warning passages of Hebrews. Why? Because if we lose sight of Jesus, weariness and discouragement soon follow. And what happens if we live in weariness and discouragement? We find ourselves at the edge of a cliff. We find ourselves with nowhere to turn. We find ourselves with not knowing how to get past it. But the answer then is the same answer today. It's the same answer that the author has been pointing us towards since the beginning of this message. And it's a simple one, which is surprising to me because in the midst of perhaps the most theologically complex, a message about the person and work of Jesus Christ, we find the simplest of answers and simplest of solutions. It is to fix our eyes on Him. To fix our attention, fix our focus on the one who is both the author and the finisher of our faith. The one who brought it into being and the one who will bring it to its conclusion. So my question for us is, do you know that one? I mean, he's the one who can bring encouragement in the midst of challenges. If you are one of those who walked into this room this morning or turned your computer on wherever you might be, and you found yourself at the edge of a cliff this morning, then the first question to ask is, do you know Him? Do you know the one who is greater than the angels, the one who is greater than Moses, greater than all of these things, the one who laid His life down for your sake? Because if you do, to know Him is to know encouragement. To know Him is to walk by faith. To know Him is to know confidence. All that He has laid before us these last weeks. And I wonder for some of us who perhaps have been, perhaps we have been Christians a long time, but we have not been walking by faith. Perhaps it's time we stopped observing the faith of others and started to walk it. You see, that doesn't mean that immediately God's going to call us all to the other side of the world. It doesn't mean that He's going to call us to face giants as He did with David. But it does mean that He is calling us all to walk faithfully, a step at a time, a day at a time, in light of who He is. And when we do that, if we will do that, it doesn't matter what challenges you find yourself in. Those around you will want to know, how can you smile in the midst of this circumstance? How can you have hope when everything looks dismal? How can you have that kind of joy in your heart when the doctors just told you how bad things are? Well, the answer is Jesus. Doesn't mean that all of our problems go away, but it means that He will shine in the midst of it. And that is the encouragement of Hebrews. That is why things, that is why he emphasizes and why he encourages those believers, don't forsake gathering together. Because when we gather together and we sing praises to God together, that alone encourages our hearts, reminds us of who He is, and gives us hope. So wherever you might find yourself, whatever challenge you might be in the midst of, fix your eyes on Him, and encouragement will soon follow.